Okay. O nga hung benzagura pema CD hung. O nga hung benzagura pema CD hung. O nga hung benzagura pema CD hung. Just give me one moment. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Dharmata here in Silent Sim. Second Life. Welcome to my regular Monday Dharma talk here at Dharmata. Welcome all. Namaskar. So today's talk is entitled Padmasambhava, the teacher for our time, and is about Padmasambhava, the great 8th century tantric master who is credited with the conversion of Tibet to Vajrayana Buddhism. And let's begin. Actually, let's begin. So today's talk is fairly deep and is going to take the full hour. But if you do have any questions about anything in the talk, please feel free to interrupt. I'll try to keep at least my left eye in the chat while I read with my right eye. And if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and we'll address them as they arise. And just for information, all dates referred to in the talk refer to the Common Era, unless indicated otherwise. So, Padmasambhava was a born Buddhist mystic who flourished in the 8th century. He was probably born about the year 732, though estimates differ. Although his hagiography is couched in symbolic allusions, he is referred to in the Testament of Ba, which may be dated as early as the 9th century. It seems likely, therefore, that underneath the mythology, there's a core of real historical fact, and many scholars recognize Padmasambhava as an historical person. His name means lotus-born. He was also known as Guru Rinpoche, which means precious teacher. Padmasambhava introduced Buddhist Tantra to Tibet and is credited with the conversion of the Tibetan people to Buddhism. He also participated in the construction of Samye, the first Tibetan Buddhist monastery, between 787 and 791, along with son Takshita, who lived between 725 and 788. It appears that he was a waterworks expert, as he is reputed to have diverted streams and rivers for irrigation purposes. Statues and paintings of Padmasambhava may be recognized by his piercing gaze, facial hair, and childlike appearance, as well as a skull cup full of ambrosia that he holds in his left hand. If you look at the easel to my right, that is a fairly typical representation of Padmasambhava. There's also an image of Padmasambhava beyond the easel to the right on wall, which you can also take a look at. There we go. Okay, thank you. So, sorry, just give me 1 second. So, this ambrosia that I referred to is soma, a famous nectar of the rishis, widely regarded as an entheogen or psychedelic drug. According to tradition, he originated in Udayana, a country conventionally identified with the Swat Valley in Pakistan, although this is somewhat disputed. Herbert Gunther suggests that, in fact, his province was a little broader than that, which was famous for its magicians. Perhaps these were the same magicians from the East who traveled west in pursuit of the Star of Christ. 6th century Chinese texts refer to missions from the kingdom of Udayana to the Chinese court. Padmasambhava was a member of the Yogacara sect, which holds that only consciousness exists, the essential nature of which is suchness or emptiness. Padmasambhava attained enlightenment near Kathmandu, Nepal, after which he taught at Nalanda University in India at a site visited by the Buddha. Padmasambhava is regarded as the teacher of the millennium of degeneration, the Mappo, which began about the year 1000. And it also appears that he actually prophesied that era as well. King Chazon Datsun, who ruled between 755 and 797, invited Padmasambhava to Tibet about the year 787, at the suggestion of Santakshita, the abbot of Nalanda University. Indigenous shamanistic forces were said to be opposing the establishment of Buddhism in Tibet, which Padmasambhava overcame by occult means. The Nyingma, founded by Padmasambhava, is the second largest Buddhist sect in Tibet and practices tantric ritual worship and yoga, based in part on a series of inspired texts called termas or treasure texts. Termas are a fourth category of revelatory text, along with sutta, sutra, and tantra. The famous Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Todol, which the provenance of which is the 14th century, is one such terma. These were attributed to Padmasambhava and his immediate disciples, and some of them constitute some very significant and profound spiritual literature. Terma discoverers are known as Tertons. The first Terton was Songye Lama, who lived between 1000 and 1080. Tibetans believe that Padmasambhava, like Siddhartha Gautama, who lived between approximately 480 and approximately 400 Common Era, was a fully enlightened master. His coming was predicted by 19 different sutras and tantras, especially the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which was written between about 100 and 220. And I'll put the quote that I'm about to read in the text, in the chat, so you can follow it along. Impermanence is the nature of all created phenomena. Death being inevitable. Time for my passing into nirvana has arrived. Of this, this is the Buddha speaking, of course. Of this you should not grieve. 1200 years after my passing, there shall come forth a man, the lake-born lotus, from northwest Udayana, who shall be yet wiser and more powerful than myself. It shall be he who will promulgate the way of secret mantra. Interestingly, Padmasambhava left Tibet about 804. 804 minus 1200 is 397 before the Common Era, a date which is only now becoming accepted by scholars as the historical date of the Buddha's parinirvana, and is also confirmed by the Lotus Sutra. Sorry about that. And 804 plus 1200 is 2004. Thus, the midpoint of the Buddhist era of 5,000 years is the year 2104, which is turning out to be a pretty important year for the history of humanity, it seems. This period, the period of the 21st century of the Common Calendar, centered on 2059, is surely an extraordinary period of human history, characterized by climate change and scientific and technological transformation. It is also a time of Buddhist renewal, according to the Dharma transmission to the West, when transmission to the West, when all Buddhist traditions will be unified in the Ekayana prior to the manifestation of Shambhala, some 365 years hence. Padmasambhava is regarded as an emanation of the wisdom of the Buddha, who continues to emanate enlightened beings out of compassion for the world from his discarnate state. The highest Buddhist teaching is Dzogchen, also known as Hatha Yoga, which was transmitted to Padmasambhava by the yogi Garab Dorji, and thus transmitted to future generations through his disciples, including the yogini Yeshe Tsogyal, lived between 757 and 817. His consort or Shakti, who also became his spiritual heir. Termas constitute the sacred literature of Dzogchen. The essential teachings of Dzogchen are the transcendence of duality, and the realization of the infinite potential of human consciousness. Padmasambhava is also believed to have attained the rainbow body, sometimes referred to as the body of light, the glorified body of Paul. That's Paul of the New Testament, of course, who alludes to something very similar. And in fact, there's a book, a very interesting book by a Roman Catholic author, scholar, who put a lot of trouble researching this tradition in Tibet and surrounding areas, and wrote a very interesting book about this. Through devotion to Padmasambhava and understanding the totality of the universal flux as his display, one can remove negative obscurations, increase intelligence, develop profound knowledge, free oneself from egoistic and negative emotions. So, to repeat, through devotion to Padmasambhava and understanding the totality of the universal flux as his display, one can remove negative obscurations, increase intelligence, develop profound knowledge, free oneself from egoistic and negative emotions, deepen spiritual growth, awaken using self-discipline and renunciation, subdue negative influences, and dispel mental and emotional obstacles. By these means, one achieves long life, good health, peace, happiness, and ultimately enlightenment. Padmasambhava, like all Buddhas, is beyond good and evil. A story to illustrate this point is that Padmasambhava is said to have dropped, apparently intentionally. Of course, this is probably a mythological story, so we shouldn't be too concerned about that, a trident on the son of a harmful minister at the age of 13. The child was on the point of dying and being reborn in the lower realms. Thus, the child was liberated and reborn in a Buddha realm. Historically true or not, this story illustrates the principle that good and evil are just another form of duality. They too must be transcended. Lao Tzu makes exactly the same point in the Tao Te Ching. The true sage has a crazy wisdom or morally ambiguous aspect. After this, Padmasambhava was banished from Odayana and spent many years meditating and practicing yoga in the cemeteries of northern India, where he received many blessings and spiritual empowerments, as well as Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened. Padmasambhava himself appears to have written a number of instructions with his Tibetan editor, including a commentary on a Mahayoga Tantra known as the Noose of Methods, possibly the Tantra itself, the Garland of Views, the Vajra Vidarana Dharani, and others. Based on these texts, Padmasambhava seems to have been interested in the Mahayoga class of Tantra, in which the universe is visualized as the play of the divine, especially the deity of Vajrakila, a divine thought form, or egregore in the terminology that I've used in previous talks, that clears obstacles and obscurations and embodies the activities of Buddha mind. Renowned Buddhist scholar Dr. Herbert Gunther has written his own commentary on a number of old termas that he attributes to Padmasambhava, entitled The Teachings of Padmasambhava, which he published in 1996. It is still available from Brill Publishing, a well-known Indological publisher, and as I do recommend this book very strongly. It is practically, if not only, the only text in English about the actual historical teachings of Padmasambhava, as distinct from the termas, which are also beginning translated to English as well. This is the only explanation of the original teachings of Padmasambhava that I know of in English. There is another book which I have but cannot read in French, which also purports to describe his teachings. To what extent it's historical or to what extent it's based on the termas, I do not know, since I don't read French. According to Gunther, Padmasambhava was probably a refugee from the Arab incursions throughout the Middle East. After establishing a reputation as a religious scholar and adept, he became embroiled in the anti-foreign hysteria that resulted from the Samyet debate, also known as the Great Debate, 792 to 794, and was forced to leave the country under ambiguous circumstances, whence he traveled to the southwest. Tradition says that as he crossed the border, he turned towards Tibet and prophesied that great troubles would afflict Tibet in the future because he was unable to complete his work there. It is to be noted in the context of the current troubles that the anti-foreign hysteria focused on Chan Buddhism, including the expulsion of the Chinese from Tibet. Karma is ubiquitous and indefatigable. So that completes the first section of the talk. The second section, which is called The Teachings of Padmasambhava, is actually based on the book The Teachings of Padmasambhava by Herbert Gunther. A very difficult book to digest, so I do apologize for any obscurity. I have tried to simplify it as much as possible, and as I said before, if you do have any questions, we can stop and discuss them as we go along. Padmasambhava's writings fall into two groups. One group reflects his extraordinary vision and experience and is rich in original symbolic references. His main questions are, who are we? What have we lost? And what are we going to become? In the form of a dialogue between a teacher and a disciple that takes place in a spiritual world. Padmasambhava produced these writings together with his editor-translator, Kaba Paltseg. The Tibetan government sealed these writings. The second category also deals with visionary experiences of an imaginal psychological character. More conventionally Indian in style, they were edited by Vairocana. Padmasambhava's thinking was unorthodox, even heretical, and may have been seen as subversive and better to be kept secret. A Padmasambhava begins with experience in its intuitive immediacy. The experiencer feels its dynamic universality, but he is so intertwined with it that as the experiencer he is the world, just as the world we experience is the experiencer. Padmasambhava's thinking is anthropocosmic. To the extent that humanity stands at the center of his vision and interest, his anthropocosmic way of thinking is like that of Gnosticism, but also differs from it. Padmasambhava does not think that humanity is the creation of a god or a demiurge, but that consciousness evolves out of its own innate potential. Therefore, being human is inherent in reality itself. In its dynamics, it expresses itself in creative symbols. These are the epiphanies of its mystery, that are understood in the immediacy of their experiencing, before they are shaped into distinct patterns of meaning and or images by the universal, non-local mind. The experiencer is a ubiquitous and indeed infinite omnipresence that is not the same as or identifiable with the ego, which is a secondary, emergent phenomenon within and of a larger whole that in itself is irreducible to anything. Padmasambhava has called this felt dynamics sheer intensity, or individuated energy, in the sense of one's core creative force. These are all quotations from Gunther, which precedes any name or label that one may assign to it, much like Lao-Tzu's conception of De. Let me have a glug of water and then we'll continue. The dynamics of this power at the core of creation, or rather creating, manifest through images and symbols that carry within them a luminous, radiant quality. Thus, we are essentially luminous beings, living in the immediacy of these images. We cannot interpret them without appreciating them in terms of our being in the world and in the world of nature. Thus, these images and symbols are also physical, and therefore they are sensual. The immediacy of sheer physical experience is not found anywhere else than in the images or patterns, experienced and experienceable, that in turn lead to different interpretations depending on the perspective of the experiencer, the act of observation, to borrow a term from quantum physics. Padmasambhava's intrapsychic dialogue lets the teacher, who is utterly free from the limitations set by the categories of rational thought, quote-unquote, respond to the question of the little man who is the whole's self-manifesting light, quote-unquote, about the emergence of the whole's brilliant and radiant functionality. Everything owes its existence to this intensity, energy. The uniqueness and sovereignty of his thinking shows itself at its best in this creative understanding. Padmasambhav's holistic vision transcends the traditional division between mind and matter, the emotional, instinctual, and the spiritual, in two related experiential practices, namely Spiti, general or universal yoga, and Yangti, continuous or higher yoga, where the term yoga itself is understood as a leap. Spiti yoga is the leap that aims high, quote unquote, whereas Yangti yoga is the leap that makes the one who takes it supreme, quote unquote. According to Jean-Luc Achard, Spiti yoga contains the instructions that directly introduce one to one's true nature, great primordial purity, quote unquote, described as the union of emptiness and clarity, corresponding to primordial purity and spontaneity respectively, and is radically non-dual and transrational. It is also declared to be swift and easy. It is associated with the practice of Guru Yoga and sky gazing, though technically the practice of Spiti Yoga is no practice. It is identical with the Samadhi of suchness in Mahayoga. In the Spiti Yoga, passion is naturally liberated rather than being renounced or transformed, and is its own unique path. Spiti is specifically associated with Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava's unique visionary world is threefold. Planes of reality incorporate many different images, ideas, and contexts. The upper plane is divine. The middle plane is the in-between human world. The lower plane is demonic. Padmasambhava's world has no creator god or demiurge. Padmasambhava's world is moreover psychological and experiential, ranging from the instinctual or demonic, which we would call today the unconscious or perhaps the shadow, following Jung, to the ethereal or divine, the superconscious or supermental. It is the reflexive self-expression or self-presentation of the psyche to itself. Elemental female psychic forces or spirits, dakini, psychic images, symbols or archetypes, whatever conceptual framework you prefer, transmit Padmasambhava's account of this lived experience to the reader. One thinks immediately of Jung's theory of the anima. The upper plane of the threefold world is transcendent and dynamic. Padmasambhava refers to the vortex-like swirling immensity of the sky, quote unquote. The quotation describes a mental state that is intense and intensive or vertical, and extensive or spatial. The vortex is of the sky, therefore space itself is inherently dynamic. Space is utterly pure and translucent to the experiencer and is also a symbol. Space is brilliant, radiant, superconscious, and ecstatic. The vortex is the energy of the totality within and out of which arise the semantic distinctions of thoughts and meanings. Thus arise the errors of mistaken identifications and misplaced concretizations that are one's existential being. This is what is meant by the title, the purity, translucency of the vortex-like swirling immensity of the sky, quote unquote. This phrase further implies a pre-existing structure, architecture, substructure, or infrastructure that underlies in patterns our organic experiencing, which is therefore universal. Thus, the universal is inherently proliferating but ignorant, the state of no information or avidya. The upper plane becomes structural, territorial, visual, etc., which we symbolize as a vast palace. Jung recognizes the symbol of the palace, castle, etc. as an archetype of the self, and especially the unconscious. The vastness of the palace is likened to the incarnation or embodiment of universal, non-local consciousness in some specific space, subject to karma or time. Nevertheless, the palace remains a symbol of the essential nature of the experiencer, where male and female archetypes exist in a continuously blissful union. The male archetype is called he whose crown jewels firmly planted on his head, quote unquote. The female archetype is named sovereign mistress of the phenomenal world, quote unquote. This image is both psychological and ontological. The crown jewel is the precious jewel of Dharma, firmly planted on the head, site of the energy center of bliss supreme, quote-unquote, the Sahasrara chakra located at the crown of the head. This bliss or ecstasy is the natural superconscious state of mind, symbolically identified with the light of the sun, thousand-spoked. The female archetype is the principle of impermanence, the realization of which is emancipation. In a phrase that is eerily reminiscent of quantum physics, Padmasambhava describes the samsaric world of phenomenality as, quote, that which lights up and is interpreted probabilistically, quote unquote. That is, the energetic network of potentials that manifest as patterns of consciousness, meaning, and thought in and through samsaric phenomena. If reality is probabilistic, it is characterized by patterns of meaning that are continuously changing and shifting, including the active observation that itself gives meaning, structure, and reality to experience. This is prajna, or wisdom, which is non-rational or irrational and includes morality. Wisdom is not something that can be manipulated or which seeks to manipulate. It is out of that sphere altogether. Padmasambhava symbolically refers to the meanings, or memes, of wisdom as the children of the female archetype. Corollary of wisdom is upaya, practice or praxis, identified with the male archetype. The intensive non-duality of wisdom and praxis means that any change in the energy of one affects and is responded to by the energy of the other. This non-dual duality is effectively represented by love. Padmasambhava focuses on the inner or psychological dimension of love, which he identifies with empowering energy, quote unquote. The essence of this union is the Dakini, a psychic female force that expresses the interaction of the polarities and the transformation that triggers the free flow of energy, symbolized as two intermingled streams of red and white nectar. Together they represent the Amrita, or Soma, the divine draught of immortality. Red is the color of instinctuality, white of spirituality. Together they produce a child that is both emotional, instinctual, and spiritual, and by uniting actually transcends the binary. This structure is also found in Hebrew Kabbalah, where it is called the Tetragrammaton. However, this is another story. The child as the product of the binary is that which gives meaning and value to the process. Duality is resolved in unity, which is intrinsically dynamic and energetic. The spiritual and the instinctual polarities express themselves through language, symbolism, or speech centered on the throat chakra. Vishuddhi in Sanskrit. This dialectic is resolved in the proto-spiritual dimension of the heart, whence it manifests as compassion. Similarly, we associate feelings with the heart. Throat and heart, speech and spirituality articulate man's pre-egological being in the context of the sense of our bodily being in the world. Body is the crown jewel of the head. This body is not the ordinary body, but an ecstatic body, luminous, charismatic, enlightened, and full of infinite possibilities, a body of light. In the splendor of the sun and the moon, Padmasambhava has the Dakini say, and I'll post the quotation in the chat. The radiant, no, it didn't take, hold on. Sorry, just bear with me. There we go. The radiant light of the moon purifies the mental darkness of ignorance. The radiant light of the sun increases wisdom. Gunther identifies the sun with praxis and the moon with wisdom. The unity of wisdom and praxis is the clear light of Buddha nature. In a remarkable prophecy of Einstein's theory of space-time, in which physical objects are curvatures and thus vortices in space, Padmasambhava describes the sun and the moon as the quintessence of the sky in its field-like dimension or Buddha field, quote unquote. Since they are the essential dynamic energies of this dimension, they illuminate the entire universe. Mental darkness of ignorance, quote unquote, includes emotional implications and implies intellectual and spiritual blindness. The human world is called the in-between plane, or bardo. Just as on the top plane there are no gods as commonly understood, so in the human plane there are no humans as commonly understood. Like the top plane, the in-between plane is an imaginal energetic world with extensive existential implications. A palace is hidden deep within this plane as a symbol of the exquisite mystery of life. It replicates the citadel of the top plane in miniature. Macrocosm becomes microcosm, and microcosm reflects macrocosm. Immeasurability is reduced to measurability by its self-geometrization in a mandala structured as a palace. In fact, mandalas are 2D representations of 3D constructions, which resemble blueprints. Padmasambhava compares the universe to an amulet box. Inside is a precious jewel, which is the lived experience of the noble individual as an expression of human potential. Thus, the universe is both closed or enclosed by structure and open in its infinite degrees of freedom. It is the finitization of the infinite. This palace is not static, but dynamic. Gunther expresses a live process structure as, quote, lighting up, quote unquote. This process of universal illumination refers to the inherently dynamic principle of the in-between plane of praxis. The paradigmatic character of the palace refers to wisdom as meaning. The unity of praxis and wisdom may be conceptualized as a gigantic thought experiment. This corresponds to modern scientific speculations concerning a virtual universe or even a multiverse. The system described is fundamentally hierarchical. The top plane is the highest and most abstract concept of a Pure Land or Buddha field. It forms a kind of spatial extensity that remains fundamentally human. The only ultimately satisfactory explanation of the human phenomenon is that reality is essentially human. Thus, the sheer intensity of thinking's thinking, quote unquote, is the polarity that allows the top plane to manifest in the dimension of space. This dyad must be understood as a process of discovering what it is to be human as a thought experiment that originates in an imaginal above that manifests in an imaginal below. The palace is inhabited by the archetypal father, the anthropos. The Tibetan word literally means child or children, and the mother or consort. The palace and its inhabitants are purely energetic informational constructs. Gunther identifies the anthropos, the child, or man of light, as he prefers it, with the individual at its most abstract level. This is the mind stream, which is fundamentally differentiated and kinetic. Thus, the dynamics of the individual psyche reflect far more abstract archetypal structures, like the palace with its divine triad. We also find the man of light in Sufism, described by Henri Corbin as the quoting the hidden spiritual man, quote unquote, the individual par excellence, quote unquote, the spiritual hero, quote unquote, the guide, the perfect nature, quote unquote, the divine light within you, quote unquote, the precious gem, quote unquote. This is, of course, the Tathagata or Buddha nature in Buddhist diction, the inner guide of Vishnu, Bhaskarlele or Sri Aurobindo, whose name, sorry, I misspoke that. This is, of course, the Tathagata or Buddha nature in Buddhist diction, the inner guide of Vishnu, Bhaskarlele or Sri Aurobindo, whose name also means lotus, interestingly. Apparently his father was inspired at his birth to call him that. The palace is the psyche, as described in the psychology of Carl Gustav Jung, a pure energy information system that is embodied in the body as lived. It is characterized by innate clarity and awareness. This body as lived, or flesh, is neither matter nor mind, but a fusion of the two and more. It is not merely substance, but a fundamental element of being. Its essential tendency becomes a light and radiates beyond itself. This luminous quality is intervolved with a quality of agitation, excitation, or excitability. Thus one lights up with pleasure, quotes unquote, shines with joy, quote unquote, or glows with ecstasy, quote unquote. Therefore, excitation or excitability is a fundamental quality of being. In the thinking of Padmasambhava, reality itself is cognitive. The all excitation excitability, quote unquote, is the cosmic human's growth into its superconscious ecstatic intensity. Thus, Padmasambhava refers to the anthropos as a magician, the lord of phantasms, quote unquote, or illusions. The consort of the man of light is called Brilliancy's blaze. She is described as beautiful and clear-minded. Like the man of light, she fuses materiality and immateriality, visibility and invisibility, and physicality and spirituality in a single symbol. The trans-binary union of the man of light and Brilliancy's blaze generates a fire that is both cosmic and psychic, that leaps up and consumes the entire universe. The anthropic universe as we understand it is annihilated. Padmasambhava refers to the ashes that are blown away by the wind or prana of the void. Fire that leaps up from the in-between plane is related to the water or rain of nectar that pours down from above. Water is nourishing and life-giving, fire life-destroying. The descending rain of nectar as water divides into two red and white streams. They are envisioned and felt by the experiencer in physical emotions associated with the male and female energies. The upward leap of fire is not only experienced as destructive of samsara, but also as purifying, so that samsara may be experienced in its essential purity. Similarly, the descent of the rain of nectar materialized in the binary of red and white streams may be experienced as a closure. The upward leap of fire may be experienced as a process of dematerialization and opening up to the very being of the whole. Thus, water and fire constitute the twin dynamics of life itself. What is the relationship between this all-consuming fire as an opening up, quote unquote, and the utter void, quote unquote, referred to by the Mahaguru and his consort? Gunther addresses this question in the context of modern physics, in which he identifies the void with the vacuum's zero point energy, that is essentially ineffable. The void is the real formative matrix that patterns itself both in its unobservable substructure as well as in its subatomic structure, which finally constitute our ordinary sensory experience. The streams of red and white nectar, or water and fire, suggest a mythological Buddhist motif called the twin miracle. It is supposed to have been performed 7 years after the Buddha's enlightenment, at the age therefore of 32, in the city of Savatthi. The Buddha emitted fire from the crown of his head and water from his feet at the same time. They then alternated back and forth, generating all the colors of the rainbow, which expand to illuminate the cosmos. The Buddha also performed the twin miracle at Kapilavastu, the place of his birth. Here the Buddha levitated as well, is reputed to have levitated as well. Variations include the creation of a jeweled walkway in the air, and the Buddha creating duplicates of his own body. He then stages a dialogue with himself, offering Dharma instruction, culminating in the creation of the Abhidharma. The twin miracle is a mark of Buddhahood and the power of Dharma. Padmasambhava clearly understands the twin miracle not as an historical, but as a symbolic story. Thus, the in-between plane of the threefold cosmos lights up and comes to presence as the radiance of the void. This coming to presence is experienced as an authentic interior vision that moves from within out, not from without in. The primary image is that of the throne, which has the highest existential significance as the seat of authority traditionally associated with kingship. The outward directed perspective is limiting, whereas the inward directed perspective is expanding. Ontologically, the throne is the center of the universe. Psychologically, it is the center of the self, not to be confused with the empty ego bubble. Either way, as a center, orientational points are implied. Thus, the throne assumes the character of a quaternary or a mandala, the second image. The third image, a numinous moon, symbolizing spiritual gnosis or realization, arises from the center of the mandala, dissipating all darkness. Its light grows out of the emptiness of the void, like the waxing moon in the darkness of night, or a virtual particle. Gunter recasts Padmasambhava's poetic diction and imagination in the language of phenomenology. Human spirituality is based on the body, itself based on the light or energy of being. Matter is energy, energy is information, information is consciousness, consciousness is empty, emptiness is dynamic, the dynamic posits the static, which posits the dual, non-dual, original intuitive fact of consciousness, which is intentional, factual, and ineffable. These three symbols, throne, mandala, moon, present a unifying experience that cannot be expressed in ordinary language. It is normally obscured by the spiritual darkness of ignorance, in which the emotional veils and blindfolds predominate as the sedimentations of karma. This programs subsequent experience within the framework of one's being in the world. The rational/intellectual obsession that denies what it cannot analyze cannot see this, however. These layers, consumed by the fire of insight, revealed the preciousness that we are by virtue of our universality. This shines forth as the inherent clear light of the Buddha nature that is our own unique essence. Through this, we experience ourselves as pure energetic beings. Padmasambhava distinguishes between the inherently energetic nature of being human and its luminous projection. This is also the source of the experiencer's errancy. We chase after the semblance of light in illusory objects rather than the light itself. To understand human potential without misinterpreting its unfolding is the ultimate value of a physical life lived authentically with awareness reality as it is. This description of the threefold cosmos ends with a description of the subterranean lower plane. This is the demonic world of beings that consume flesh and blood. In this domain, the archetypal father is the demon called Zala Raksha, the literal meaning of which is unknown, and the archetypal mother is a black demoness of death called the all-liberating mother, Kunskroma. Like an astronomical black hole, together they generate an enormous cosmic storm that sucks into itself everything in the phenomenal world, including all the labels and ideas, that is, information, removing the dirt and debris of all of one's notions and emotions, intellectual postulates and constructions. This leaves a space that is devoid even of the notion of a void, an utter emptiness that appears full. Just going to have some water, if you excuse me. The description of the bottom plane exemplifies life on the in-between plane before the self-renewal of the human-centered universe began. That is, everything on the in-between plane is consumed by fire and the ashes dispersed by a strong wind. This shattering experience explains the fearsomeness of the lower plane. We tend to cling to our habits, believing them to have universal validity. Instead, all of this has been annihilated, leaving only fearsome and malevolent demons. In Kabbalah, these are known as the kelepot, the shells of creation. These are not evil in themselves, but warn us to abandon desirous attachment. Their blackness and death is just us reflected in their eyes. Thus we must face and indeed transcend death in order to experience the freedom, openness, and radiance of being. The archetypal mother is described as the black demoness of death who frees us completely, quote unquote. This view of the demonic is in stark contrast to the Judaic conception derived from Zoroastrianism, in which evil is hypostasized as an external agency to be objectified, repressed, and ultimately destroyed. The bane of our modern civilization right now, as it happens. We see this dynamic playing itself out in the history of the world today, characterized by conflict and mutual annihilation. The threefold cosmos is an imaginal or symbolic world. It is both process and structure. By structure, we mean nothing static, but inter-evolved dynamic dimensions that are only accessible through an inner understanding that makes humanity central to the anthropo-cosmic process. Being in the middle, without beginning or ending, birth or death, does not contradict the apparent vertical or temporally coherent hierarchy of the process structure of the dualistic interaction of the male and female principles in space. Together they constitute the horizontal plane. It is from the middle or center that humanity spreads out into and connects with all of the dimensions of reality. Wherever we look, we find the binary principle at work. This includes the duality of visible and invisible, divine and demonic, light and dark, good and evil. Is not being human the embodied play of opposites? This dyad represents the interplay of external forces. Experiencers share another binary deep within. This only has meaning with us. That is the binary of the archetypal father and the archetypal mother, and their archetypal son, the infant anthropos, the child or little man of light. According to Padmasambhava, forefather pre-beginning is the commander who wears space as his garment. He is seated on the earth as his throne. He has tied the stars and planets together as a belt. The fog is a cap on his head. The rainbow is his royal banner. He holds the sun in his right hand and the moon in his left. He eats the phenomenal and interpreted world and swallows the oceans. The imagery is apocalyptic, familiar to us from the Book of Revelation and Jewish apocalyptic literature. He rips out and devours the hearts of all living beings, filling their bodies with bliss. Thus they become spiritually awakened and immortal. The archetypal mother is majestic and powerful. She is the archetypal image of nature as created and creating. She is the sovereign lady and queen of the whole phenomenal and interpreted world. She is the source of life, the all-ground, the great powerful one of the multiverse. Living beings are born from her and die within her, but they do not increase or decrease in numbers. Nothing ceases, nothing is filled, and nothing is voided. Finally, the man of light, or anthropos, occupies a temple that is nothingness radiating into the dimension of space. He wears a luminous garment with a five-colored rainbow as his belt, clouds a cap on his head, and the wind as his horse, with ripples of water as a bridle. In his right hand he holds a sword, which he uses to cut down and eradicate all erroneous thoughts. He holds the sun and the moon as a lamp in his left hand, which he uses to dispel ignorance. Having drunk the Amrita, the elixir of immortality or deathlessness, he harmonizes the actual and the potential. He has a wish-fulfilling jewel tied to his heart. He sees the dimension of space, sleeps in the oceanic dynamic, and sits between the sun and the moon. He enters into the fivefold light and is carried away by a black sandstorm. There is nothing static about Padmasambhava's threefold cosmos. It is a process or process structure in which the three planes are higher dimensional orientation points. This cosmos closes in on itself as the whole of being. Each progressive closure is symbolized as a citadel, a palace, and a temple. The symbolism induces feelings of awe, reverence, and the sacred. Thus, the observer, as experiencer, becomes an essential part of the process. He is the sun. He is the offspring of the infinite intensity of being as the archetypal father and the infinite possibilities of extensity that are the archetypal mother. The vision is intensely luminous. One might call this threefold unity of father, mother, and son the pleromatic family, referring to the Gnostic pleroma, the spiritual universe as the abode of the divine, and the fullness or wholeness of divine powers and their emanations. However, whereas Gnosticism is reductionist, Padmasambhava's thinking is evolutionary. The Son descends into the world not as a savior, which Gunther dismisses as dominant psychology, but as the one who has to live and realize themselves as fully human. The symbolic allegory perpetuates itself simply because it enlivens the mystery. Okay, that does conclude today's talk on the teachings of Padmasambhava. Before we conclude with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. Does anyone have, we have 8 minutes to go. Does anyone have any questions, comments, discussion about anything I said today? You can put it in the chat. And while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to plug a talk that we'll be going to be doing here, not here, over at the Gnostic Sanctuary on Wednesday. That's 2 days from now, Wednesday the 23rd of June. This is a repetition of a talk that I gave especially for the summer solstice on yesterday, Sunday. For people who weren't able to attend on the weekend, I will be repeating it on Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Second Lifetime. It is 1.5 hours in length, and it is a special talk on an organization called the AA, or Agentium Astrum, which was founded in 1907 by the well-known, somewhat notorious magician, I guess, technically, rather in the similar category to Padmasambhava, actually, Aleister Crowley, and also one George Cecil Jones. They founded the AA together in 1907 as a magical order based on the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and we will be discussing the system and structure of the AA on Wednesday, 2 days from now, beginning at 12:30 p.m. Second Lifetime, going for 1.5 hours. So I don't see any questions, comments, or discussion in the chat. Just checking. Nope, I don't see anything here. So let's conclude with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. I just have to pull it up. One of these days I'm going to have to memorize it. It is, of course, based on the dedication merit used by Alex Berzin, for whom I have a great deal of respect, and I particularly like his version because of its straightforward and not overly elaborate character. So please feel free to join me in this. Whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much for this once again, for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. We will be returning next week, of course, Monday at 1 p.m. Second Lifetime for our next talk in this series of talks on Buddhism here at Dharmata. Thank you very much for your attention. Namaskar.